Okay, we are on Daf Mem Tes Amud Aleph. For learning as a schus for Shlema Filan Chaya Bas Serach. So, in the previous blot, we had learned about the Oila, and we learned about the Chatas. There needs to be B'tzach. Now we're up to the Asham. Asham is another. I think it's the end of our Kache Kachim, as far as I could remember, I guess. And it's also has to be B'tzach. And so we said, where do we know? We said, first of all, there's a pasuk that says about the Asham, and then we said there's another pasuk by Asham Mitzayra. Asham Mitzayra is a specific kind of Asham that, as we've said many times, needs the matan b'hainis. You have to put a little bit of the dam on his thumb and on his fingers, on his big toe and on his ear. So and the pasuk says over there, sorry, it says the pasuk there. Was v'shachar es hakeves, I think. Yeah. It says it says v'shachar es hakeves. So we say that's an extra pasuk to tell you also that it's going to be b'malkai mashi yishchad es hachatas ha'oila. So you have a second pasuk for asham, and that tells you there has to be that it's la'akav. Now, so we asked, but we need it for something else, because we know there's a rule. If you have, for example, over here you have mitzayra, you have the din of asham, and asham mitzayra has a special din of having the dam on its thumbs and big toe and ear. So the also we see that there's that the pasuk says, I said there's a brisa that says, why the Gemara asks, Shein tamalem khatz asham, matamale khatz asham. Which yatsa asham etzay lidim davar chadash b'boyin yad boyin regel boyin mash yachol lo yeh toin man dam ve'emrum legab mizbeach. So we said you might have thought that since it's exceptional, asham etzay is different than other ashamas. It also doesn't need the zrikas dam. You don't have to do the dam on the mizbeach, and you don't have to put the emurim on the mizbeach. Tamalem khatz asham. The Torah says kechatas ha'asham, that the asham is like a chatas. Ma chatas tu'unim ma'an dam ve'imrum l'gam mizbech. Haf asham tu'unim mitzayra tu'unim ma'an dam ve'imrum l'gam mizbech. So we wanted to say, so the Gemara wants to say, we're going to say a similar thing over here. Maybe the reason why the Torah had to say that the asham mitzayra is like the chatas and the oila, we said from the beginning of the pasuk, whichever was v'shachar as a kevish, v'kaymash yishchar as a chatas oila, is to tell you, don't say that it's exceptional, and therefore it doesn't need suffering. Right? We're just bringing this case, this din of kechatas ka'asham, where we say that it's coming to restore to asham mitzayra the din of matan dam and emurim, to prove that you need, by asham mitzayra, you need special psukim to restore it to the regular din of hashamas, of other karbanas. So because it's davar hayatza, davar chahay b'chlav, yatza lidim davar chadash. So the Gemara is asking on our raya, you wanted to say the Torah compared it to chatas and oila in order to let us know that it gets tzafan. And since it's the second time we're learning tzafan, it will be la'akav, but you need it for the basic din of tzafan, that for asham mitzayra, that asham mitzayra I might think is an exception to other ashams. Correct the Gemara. The Gemara says, if that's the case, if the reason why we have this extra comparison of asham mitzayra to chatas and oila is because we otherwise would think asham mitzayra is exception to the rest of ashamas that doesn't need tzafan. Let it just say by asham mitzayra, and we'll learn from asham mitzayra to the other ones. But from the fact that it said it both by general ashamas, we have a pasuk telling you to compare to chatas that it gets, or I think it's the chatas. So it's compared to Ayla. General Ashram is compared to Ayla. And now with the Torah is telling you also that the Ashram Mitzvah is compared to Chatas and Ayla. If it wanted to tell you just Ashamas, let it just say it by Ashram Mitzvah. Since Ashram Mitzvah is exceptional, that it was excluded from the rest of Ashamas, and it has Safin, it would say everything has Safin. So from the fact that it didn't do that, but it said it by both, that's Shana Lava So Gemara, no. That's only good if you say that when you have something that's exceptional, that's has a special din, like Asher Mitzayra, that it can't be learned from the cloud, can't be learned from the general din, from a regular Asher. Aval klala gamine, but that's true. But you could still learn out Asham, the regular Asham from Asham Mitzayra. If we say it did by Asham Mitzayra, which is exceptional, it will certainly be by the rest of them. Shabbat. At least real and delay who gamma miklole v'le klole gamma mine. When you have a davar that's yatsa leading b'davar chadash, neither the klal or the davar chadash can be learned out one from the other. Israel and delay who gamma miklole v'le gamma mine hayle guf v'etzrich. Then we need the pasuk. To tell you, we need the pasuk by the klal, by a regular asham, to tell you that it needs stuffing. And for the Gemara, no. Kivana hadre. We had brought the din. We said kechatas asham, which tells you earlier on Amar Aleph. We said that's an example of in what way that an asham mitzayra is a davar hayatza lidin b'davar achadash. And we said that kechatas asham tells you that it needs nitin. Nesinas dam on the mizbech, and it's a murim al gab mizbech, even though Asham Mitzvah is exceptional. But we said Chatas Asham tells you no, it's Asham is like a Chatas. The Gemara says once the Torah told you Chatas Asham, it's like a Chatas. It means it's like a Chatas for all dinim. So you already have a pasuk to tell you that the Asham Mitzvah has been treated as other Ashamas. So we don't really need this second part of the pasuk that tells you it's like a chatas and a oila, where it says in the beginning of that pasuk, before it says chatas asham. So therefore, the chayr it should be available to tell you shana lav la'akev. Amalei mezut rebeider of mari l'ravina a makia hadra kra l'gavi matan dam ve'mum l'debay kuna avshchita l'bay kuna loy mi boyitzaf. It says no, even though we have the chatas asham that tells you that Asham Mitzvah has been restored to the klal. It's treated as the regular Asham, that it gets matan damim, that you have to do the dam on the mizbeach, and you have to do the emurim on the mizbeach. Those are things that need a kayan to do. So maybe only in that category of requirements is the Asham Mitzvah treated like an Asham. But the shechita that can be done by a zar, maybe to tell you that the Asham Mitzvah is treated like the Ashamas that should need safin, maybe not. Maybe that's a different, treated as a different category. The Gemara, no. Let it just say it's like the Asham is like a chatas. Why does it say the chatas is like the Asham is like a chatas? It's kashar Ashamas yehei. The limud tells you not just legabe matan dam and emurim, because it says it with an extra word of kechatas asham, that tells you that it should be like all other ashamas. The Asham Mitzvah is not different in any way. Now the Gemara asks, so you're saying that this we're learning out. You want to learn out. The pasuk is comparing. This is at the beginning of the pasuk. It says. Why does it have to say b'makom as a chatas v'es ha'oila? Why don't you just say one of them? Why do you need both the chatas and the oila to tell you that it's going to need soften? Both as we just went through in the previous block. We spent one block learning oila, and we spent another block learning chatas. So we could do. Why do we have to compare to both? Let's just compare to one. Ravina itzrich. I'm saying we're asking on Asham. Why does Asham have to be compared to both of them? Actually, chatas will actually oila. If you would have only compared to chatas and not compared to oila, havamina chatas meichem lamda me'oila. Where do we learn out of chatas? Chatas itself is learned out from oila. If you remember, there's only one place where the Torah says soften, and that's by oila. And chatas was learned out from oila. So if you would have compared it to chatas, davar lam v'hekesh chayzam lamed. So then that would tell you davar lamed b'hekesh chayzam lamed b'hekesh. If you were to learn out from chatas. Okay, so if you're saying you don't want to tell us that davar alam b'hekesh is chayzam lamed b'hekesh, just say hekesh to oila and not chatas. Why do you have to say both? You're saying if I would have just said chatas, then I would say davar alam b'hekesh is chayzam lamed. So just do oila. Oila is the original source. So Gemara havamina davar alam b'hekesh chayzam lamed b'hekesh. The problem is we want to learn out the rule. This is the Bryce is trying to tell you a rule. The Pasuk is trying to tell you. If it would have just said Ayla, I would say, I don't know. There's no restriction saying that you can't have a davar lam b'hekesh chayzam lam b'hekesh. V'chitei menakshei akushi. And if you'll say, well, if a davar lam b'hekesh is chayzam lam b'hekesh, why did we pick Ayla? Why didn't we pick Chatas? L'chatas nichalei demak l'chatas nichalei demak shlei leika v'lei nagas shlei letafel. Nakshay akusha l'chatas. Let's compare it. Why did we pick Ayla? Let's pick Chatas. So that l'chayr should be a raya that davar alam b'hekesh is not l'chaza alam b'hekesh. Where it says no. If I would have just said Ayla, I would say nichalei demak shlei leika v'lei nagas shlei letafel. L'hakshay l'chatas v'akshay l'Ayla. L'meim davar alam b'hekesh ain't chayzam alam b'hekesh. The Torah wanted. So let's review. The Torah wanted to tell you this rule. I want to tell you two things. First of all, I wanted to tell you that a asham needs tafel, and it wanted to tell you that davar halamad b'hekesh is ein chayzam lamed b'hekesh. So first, the Gemara says, okay, so it couldn't say chatas because davar halamad b'hekesh is ein chayzam lamed b'hekesh. So why? But let it just say ayla. So the Gemara says, no, we wanted to tell you this rule that davar halamad b'hekesh is ein chayzam lamed b'hekesh. So for the Gemara, if that's the case, so why did it have to say both? Let it just say Ayla. So Gemara says, and maybe you'll say, because if it just says Ayla, I'll tell you that from the fact that the Torah picked Ayla instead of Chatas, that proves that a davar lam b'hekesh, that must be the reason why Chatas wasn't stated. Why do we have to say both? So the Gemara says no, because it would have just said Ayla. I would say it's not because davar lam b'hekesh is ein chayzam lam b'hekesh. The reason why it said Ayla is because that's the original source. It's always better to say the original source rather than to learn it out with a hekesh. So therefore, the Torah had to say both. It had to say both Ayla and Chatas. That tells you that davar halamad b'hekesh, because otherwise, what is it saying Chatas for? It must be because it's telling you this din of tzafin, and even though it's a davar halamad b'hekesh, you could. And it's telling you need to say Ayla as well because it can't be learned out because it's the davar lamed b'hekesh chayzam lamed b'hekesh. Okay. I know it sounds very repetitive and it's sort of like twisting on itself. This raya, I'm aware of that. That's the way it is. Rava Amar, that was the first source for that which we say that asham is that the rule is that davar halamad b'hekesh is ein chayzav malamed b'hekesh. Rava has a different source for this. Rava Amar mehacha t'chsev kasha yura mishar zevachim. It says about the par koyin Mashiach. It says es kol chelev apar chatas yor mimenu es achelev hamachas al akerev es kol achelev asher al akerev. We list all the different parts, inside parts of the animal. Just like they were burnt from the shlamim. That's what you're going to do with your parkay and Mashiach. That you have to do the emurim on the mizbech. What is it telling you? What does it have to tell you? The Torah lists everything. So why is it saying Kasha Yura Mikshar Zavachashlam? You already listed all the Emor. So what does it tell you? It mentions this, the Yeseres Vesakaved al Kloyes. that's mentioned in the pasuk. So again, why do you have to say that it's like the shlamim? Mishum de boy igmuri yiseres hakav stay close in parhal davar shel tzibur l'siri avodas kechab. Because we're talking now, we have to keep in mind we're talking about the pasuk over here by Parkai and Mashiach, but there's also another lima that we want to make, which is from Parhal and Davar Shel Tzibur, to tell you that Seiri Avodas Kechavim, they are horkish together. So Begufay like Siv, it doesn't say by Parhal and Davar Shel Tzibur that you need Klayas and Yeseres Hakaved and Shtei Klayas. So we learn out the Parhal and Davar Shel Tzibur for Parkai and Mashiach. Begufay like Siv when we Parkai and Mashiach with the Gamar. We learn out Parhal and Davar Shel Tzibur Parkai and Mashiach. Lahachi Yitzrach Kasha Yuram. And that's what we have to say, Kasha Yuram. Then a heavy command, the Kasa Begufay. In order, so this is the setup. The pasuk says by Parkai Mashiach you need Klayas, I'm sorry, the Yeseres HaKaved and the Shtei Klayas. And it also says it should be like you do by a Shlamim. Gemara says, what do you? It's doubling. Why are you saying it twice? We already said Yeseres Shtei Kaved. Gemara says no, because we're going to ultimately use this Parkai and Mashiach as the source for Parhalam Davar Shel Tzibur. And Parhalam Davar Shel Tzibur is going to be telling us the Seirei Yom Kippur, right? I'm sorry, L'Sirei Avodas Kechavim is going to be used for the Seirei Avodas Kechavim. Now, so that's going to be a Davar Alamad Behekesh. You can learn Parkai and Mashiach to Parhalam Davar Shel Tzibur. You're going to learn from Parhalam Davar Shel Tzibur L'Sirei Avodas Kechavim. It's going to be a Davar Alamad Behekesh Chazam Lam Behekesh. So therefore, the Torah said it twice by Parkai and Mashiach, and then we're going to say Mene Inyan Lakano B. We'll put it on Par Helam Davar Shel Tzibur to make it as if it wasn't learned from a Hekesh. We've seen this before. The Torah will sometimes double something, and that will make it as if it wasn't learned out from something else. It makes it as if it was said there itself. So and we have to stick in a little Lamena Inyan. Since we already have by Parkai and Mashiach, it's not necessary there. We switch it over to Par Helam Davar Shel Tzibur. So it's treated as if Par Helam Davar Shel Tzibur, rather than learning it out from Parkai and Mashiach, it's as if it said it over there itself. The heavy command the Kasa Begufay. V'loy nehavi davar alam behekesh v'chayzom la behekesh. Amalei Papa l'Rava v'lichtei begufa v'loy nekish. If that's the case, why is the Torah saying it? By Par Kayin Mashiach, and then we have to add an extra pasuk to make it treated as if it was said by Par Helam Davar Shel Tzibur. Let it just say it directly by Par Helam Davar Shel Tzibur, and then we'll learn it out without doubling it by Parkai Mashiach. It wants to tell you the rule that again, remember, this is all Rava who's giving an alternate source for this halacha. That's something that was learned with a hekesh cannot be used to teach another hekesh. The chitema nakshi akushi, and if you'll say, if that's the case, let it make the hekesh. Let's it's the same question like we asked before. If it was true that davar lam behekesh is chayzam lam behekesh, then why would we need the extra pasuk? Nichle because we gufa da mit akashle akushe lahach kasve akushe. Lemember davar lam behekesh ain't chayzam lam behekesh. That's why we know from the fact that it Taka wrote it out and we made that we wrote it double. It's in order to tell you that we couldn't have determined. You can't say that. I would have said that it's better to do it from the ikka, and that's the reason why we put it here. We wouldn't have learned out just from the fact that we didn't make the hekesh directly, that it's davar alam hekesh and a chayz alam hekesh. Therefore, we have to double it in order to make it clear. Okay. That the rule is that davar alam behekesh is not chayzom lamed behekesh. It's essentially the same question like we asked before, that we could have. Why couldn't I just figure it out? And the fact that the Torah had to write it as a hekesh by that the Torah wrote out the hekesh, that must be because davar alam behekesh is ein chayz of lamed behekesh. The Gemara says no. I'd say the Gemara is asking, I should have been able to determine from the fact that we learned it out. We learn par siirei yavet kechavim from par halam davashal tzi. But why don't we just do siirei yavet kechavim straight to par kayin Mashiach? Must be because davar halam hekesh ein chayz halam hekesh. The Gemara says no. It could be that the reason why we weren't makish that is because we would say that that's only because we always like to do it straight to the source rather than doing it in an attenuated way in a two-stage process, but not necessarily because you're not able to do a davar halam hekesh for chayz halam hekesh. That's why it had to say a double limud to tell you so that we'll know this rule. So we're not done with davar halam b'hekesh chayzim lam b'hekesh. Now we're really going to get into it. It means there are 4 types of limudim that we come across that we're going to be discussing. You have, and if you look at the siman, it lasts it. Hekesh gzeir shava kal v'chaymer, and we'll leave out. It's supposed to have also binyanav. There are 4 ways of learning. So the first one, hekesh. Hekesh is where the Torah says this thing A, concept A is like concept B. Or this, let's say this mitzvah is like this other mitzvah. The Torah puts them together. It says this is like this. Right? Like kechatas ha'asham. Or we say that the b'makam asher yishchad ha'oili yishchad as achatas. The makash. Then you have gzeira shava. We have a word that is repeated in 2 separate things. Let's say in one mitzvah, it says that one thing it says by tefillin, and one thing it says by tzitzis. So we learn how to din from tefillin to tzitzis. That's gzeir shava. And you have kal v'chaymer. We say if something is more chamer, if tefillin is more chamer than tzitzis, and tzitzis has rule A, then certainly tefillin will have rule A. And finally, binyanav. Binyanav is just if we say that tzitzis is a mitzvah and tefillin is a mitzvah, then if tzitzis has this rule, then tefillin will also have this rule. It's the weakest type of limud of binyanav. Doesn't have any specific really. It just says since they have a similar rule, or so they're similar in some way, therefore all of their rules are the same. It's easy to refute. Zok the Gemara. Davar halama b'hekesh she'ein chayz. So first we're going to go through all the possibilities of a hekesh followed by the other 3 things. So we're going to go through all of these. Hekesh, what if you use a hekesh to learn out something and then you use what you learned out with another hekesh? Or you learn out something with a hekesh and then you make a gzeira shava to learn it out? Or you make a kal v'chaymer, or if you make a binyanav after you already learned it out with the hekesh, right? So let's say you learned out from tefillin to tzitzis with a hekesh, and then you want to learn out from tzitzis to lulav with a hekesh. Can you do that? Or you learned out from tefillin to tzitzis with a hekesh, and now you want to learn out from tzitzis to lulav with a gzeira shava, and so on. With the same thing, hekesh followed by kal v'chaymer, and hekesh followed by binyanav. So we can go through them one by one. First, we're going to go through all the things where the first step is a hekesh. What's it? Davar lam hekesh, she'ein chayz lam hekesh. Im derava, im deravina. We said, so we had the 2 limudim on the top of the summit. That's what we first started off with. That's how we're getting into this. We just brought 2 rayas that you cannot go have a hekesh followed by a hekesh. Davar lam hekesh ma'ashi yilmid b'gzeir shava. What about the second option? If you learn out something with a hekesh, can you follow with the gzeir shava? Tashma. Rav Nosson ben Av Thomas Aimer. How do we know? There's a rule that if a person he gets a tzaras that fully covers either his whole body or his head, that's called a pricha, tzaras pricha, that he's tar. Although, if it's on half his body or on half of his head, that's going to be tameh, or even if it's 99%. But if it becomes fully covered, then he's tar. So how do we know that applies also to the tzaras that goes on the clothing? So we say nema karachas v'gabachas b'gadim. It says the words karachas v'gabachas b'gadim. Nema karachas v'gabachas b'adam. Ma'alam parach b'kulei tar. Afkam parach b'kulei tar. So just like we see legabe, where the person is fully on his whole body became parach, he's tar. So too by b'gadim. We learn how to gzeir shava. How do we know that it's true that if his whole body is covered, that he's going to be tar. We have a hekesh between his head and his feet. Just like we say, Lagabi, if his head became all white, that it becomes tar. Afkan, so too when the tzara spread on his whole body, tar. So you see, so it's learned out. So we learn out the whole body from the head, that if the hair on his head all turned white, that it's going to be tar. So too, if his whole body got tzaras, he's going to be tar. That's a hekesh. And then we follow that up. Once we know that his whole body is white as tar, is mitzaras, it's tar. So too on begadim. So you see, you have a hekesh followed by a gzeir shava. Amar Rabbi Yochanan, the Chalatayr Kula maiden milamad milamad chutz min hakachim shein don milamad milamad. Rabbi Yochanan says, what kind of raya is it? That's not kachim. All these restrictions on learning a hekesh from a hekesh or a hekesh scout, all these things are only by kachim. In other parts of the Torah, there's no problem to learn them out. That's Rabbi Yochanan Shita. This is all a kachim topic. So you don't bring me with Taras is not relevant. So he says, but I'll tell you a different raya. The in came lo yaimet to find a ba'ashim. If it's true that you can learn out by kachim, you can have a hekesh and then learn out the gzeir shava. There's no need to say it's softened by ashim. The tasting b'gzeir shava, the kachay kadashim or the kaidish kadashim. That means or kachim. What is the vav? You have double armor, one of lema, zoister sachat mokabash yishchan oila, and Hashem kodesh kadashim be, and it also says mechatoyis, because it says by chatoyis, that's by chatas. It says kodesh kadashim be, and the zoister is Hashem kodesh kadashim be. It also says kodesh kadashim by Hashem. So why can't we just make a zeir shava from Asham to Chatas? What do we need this? What do we need the Hakish for? Or what do we need the rule? What do we need a pasuk to tell you? Tzafat. So Gemara, no. The Gemara says no. Maybe the general rule is Gzeir Shava. There's different types of Gzeir Shavas. A Gzeir Shava that is only mufna mitzad echad, you can ask a kasha on it. The Gemara is assuming this is a Gzeir Shava mufna mitzad echad means that only one of the two, that you have the same word in two places, but it depends if whether those words are extra or not. If you have a Gzeir Shava and one of the words is extra, the other one is not, you can still ask a kasha on it. And over here it's possible to ask a kasha. The Chatas is mechaper achavi krisis, while Hashem is not, so you couldn't learn it out. And we don't know, kachay kachim yiseriksiv. Both kachay kachim are amiyuta. They're both mufna, and therefore it's a mufna mishnei tzadim, and therefore it's impossible to ask a kasha on it. So therefore we have a raya that davar halamad behakish is ein chayzel melamed b'gzeir shava, because you really could have learned out Hashem needs toughen from a gzeir shava, from the fact that Torah had to tell you. By says you couldn't learn it out because this is the rule. The davar halamad behakish ein chayzel melamed b'gzeir shava. Now we talk about the next one. Davar halamad behakish chayzel melamed b'kal v'chaymer. Where do we know that you can't do that? The Tana Beri Bishmal. This is back on, if you look at Rashi, this, if you remember, S v'taval, that we learned out three different halachas. We learned out from a combination of a hekesh followed by a kal v'chaymer, and then we had the discussion, the Gemara over there, of whether or not you can do that, and we said, the Rebbe Shmuel said that you cannot. What about the fourth possibility? If you have a hekesh followed by a binyav, okay, before we try to make it with a gzeir shava, let's say you should learn out softened by Asham, what does the Torah have to tell to directly? Let's learn it out from Binyanav Mechatas. And Chatas, as we know, is learned out with a Hekesh from Oila. Lamai Hilchasa Kasve. Why did Torah tell it to you? Lav Laman Davar Lav Hekesh Ein Chayzel Lamed Binyanav. So Kamala Tamech Taste Binyanav Me Oila. If you're saying a Binyanav, why don't you just learn it out directly from Oila? My time Eloyasi. Well, so why is the taka that you can't learn a Binyanav? Because you have a kasha that oila is fully consumed. So that's why you can't learn at Asham. You also have a kasha from chatas. You can't learn out a binyanav from that anyway. So your whole taina that should have been learned with the binyanav, and that tells you that you can't learn out. You couldn't learn it out either from chatas or from oila. Why don't you learn out from a tzara shava, basically two binyanavs from both chatas and oila? So, what are you suggesting? The Torah shouldn't say it by oila and learn it out from chatas and asham. It's a little hard to understand this because how could you, if it didn't say it by oila, we would have to then write the actual din of tzafan by either chatas and asham and learn out one from the other. The Gemara is saying, why do we need to do all three? Let's just say two of the three and try to make a matzad. We're asking a general question. It's not really back on the previous thing. So, so why can't we learn out either from chatas and asham, chatas and asham, for someone who does a chait? An oila can be the mechaper for chayve krisis, but oila can be brought as an adava. So let's not learn say chatas and learn out from oila and asham. Those are brought as those have to be male karbanis. You can't, if you say you don't write an asham is always only a karban yachid, but oila and a chatas, we have plenty of them on the Yom Tovim. We bring oila and chatas as a karban tzibur. Let's do one more quickly. Let's say davar alam b'gzeir shava should be learned with a hekesh. If the first thing was gzeir shava, can you learn out a hekesh? Amar papa v'zayis teres zevachim imal toida. Now you know what? I'm going to leave it because we're going to have to go through the pasuk. It's going to take a little bit of time. Okay, we're going to stop here. I always have that Yetzer Hara in the last